This doesn't match up with the truth. This is not what I was taught.
He was once America's dad for millions of viewers on The Cosby Show. He was the pride of America, a cultural icon in the black community. In the eyes of millions, he embodied kindness itself. But then, he destroyed it all and betrayed everyone. Bill Cosby. In 2018, America erupted when more than 60 women came forward with accusations against him. The image of a warm, smiling father figure suddenly collapsed, replaced by the shadow of a predator. He had used power, fame, and sedatives to turn Hollywood dreams into nightmares. The moment Bill Cosby lowered his head, his hands in handcuffs before hundreds of flashing cameras, was the moment a legend died in the eyes of the public. It wasn't just a scandal for Hollywood. It was a wound for the entire nation. The FBI officially stepped in, searching every corner of Cosby's lavish mansion. Steel doors burst open. Locked drawers were pried apart. The public froze in shock. What else had this man been hiding? What the FBI discovered inside was even more unsettling than the accusations themselves. And if you think Bill Cosby only became the center of attention in 2018, when he was sentenced, you'd be wrong. In reality, the allegations stretched back decades, but were buried beneath his fame and influence. By the late 1960s, whispers had already begun in Hollywood. Some women spoke up. Tamara Green, a lawyer, claimed Cosby had once given her pills and taken advantage of her when she lost control. Victoria Valentino, a former Playboy model, told a similar story. But at that time, the American media was almost silent. People admired Cosby too much to believe these claims could be real. To the public, he was an angel on screen. And those accusations faded like whispers in the wind, quickly forgotten. Most of these cases were too old, far beyond the statute of limitations. Cosby escaped dozens of accusations, except for one name, Andrea Constand. The downfall began one night in 2004. At his luxury estate in Cheltenham, Pennsylvania, Andrea, then an employee with Temple University's women's basketball team, was invited by Cosby under the pretense of talking about her father's cancer. Inside the cozy home, Cosby poured her a glass of wine and handed her 3 blue pills. Within minutes, Andrea's body felt heavy, her consciousness slipping. She tried to stand, tried to speak, but her body wouldn't respond. Cosby carried her to a couch and laid her down. She couldn't move. The next morning, when Andrea opened her eyes in Cosby's bed, she knew something terrible had happened. Cosby denied everything. He insisted he was innocent, even showing arrogance toward the press. But on December 30, 2015, an arrest warrant was issued based on Andrea's complaint. Cosby was detained, then quickly posted bail. Judge Stephen O'Neill granted him release on $1 million bond with strict conditions: he could not leave his home and had to wear a GPS tracker. By May 2016, the court declared there was enough evidence to prosecute. Yet after 2 weeks of trial, the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict. Cosby walked free. But justice wasn't finished. In April 2018, the case reopened. The American media called it the retrial of the century. Rumors swirled that Cosby had paid Andrea $2.4 million in a settlement, fueling public outrage. After 17 days of testimony, the jury reached its decision. Bill Cosby was guilty of 3 felony counts, including drugging and assaulting Andrea Constand. At the hearing, Cosby sat silently in the defendant's chair. Then the judge read the verdict, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Many believed he could face up to 30 years in prison, meaning he might spend the rest of his life behind bars. Finally, on September 25, 2018, Cosby was officially sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison, along with a $25,000 fine. Andrea stepped forward in court, her eyes red, but her voice firm. "All I ever asked for was justice. Bill Cosby stole my health and my vitality. 15 years ago, I was a young woman full of confidence and hope. Today, I am a middle-aged woman, trapped in the scars of the past, unable to heal, unable to move forward." Her words silenced the entire courtroom. Andrea was not alone. Back in 2014, on a small stage in Philadelphia, comedian Hannibal Buress delivered a bitter punchline: "Cosby's a monster. Everybody knows, but nobody says it." The clip went viral. Within days, accusations that had been buried for decades came roaring back stronger than ever. Women across the country began speaking out one after another. The number grew quickly from a handful to dozens and then to over 60. Their stories followed the same haunting pattern: an invitation to his home, a drink, a pill, then darkness, and broken memories. When they woke, they knew something had happened. But because his power was so overwhelming, they stayed silent. Since 2005, more than 60 women waitresses, Playboy models, journalists, young actresses had come forward. From Joan Tarshis in 1969, who recalled being drugged to Sharon Van Eert in California in 1976, who passed out and awoke alone. Or Pamela Abeda, a Playboy model in 1975, who woke up in Cosby's Las Vegas penthouse. While he was being celebrated everywhere, they were dismissed, judged, even accused of making it up. Then came the sound of the gavel echoing through the courtroom. And in that moment, America saw an image once thought impossible. Bill Cosby handcuffed in court. The same man who once walked red carpets with confidence now shuffled under police guard, his wrists bound by cold steel. That image appeared instantly on front pages worldwide. America's dad was now an inmate, a shockwave through the nation. The sentence shook America. On television, commentators stressed, "This is the first time a true A-list Hollywood star on Cosby's level has ever been sent to prison." The reaction split the nation. A small minority still defended Cosby, calling him a victim of a witch hunt in the Me Too era. But the overwhelming majority celebrated it as a historic victory for survivors. One woman in the Me Too movement wept openly before cameras. "We've waited for this day for far too long. This isn't just justice for Andrea, it's justice for every woman who was forced into silence. A moral verdict beyond the legal one." Though the sentence was 3 to 10 years, many asked, was it enough to undo decades of silence and cover-ups? Cosby was 81 years old when he entered prison. At that age, even a few years behind bars could mean the rest of his life. But the real punishment was not just those 10 years. It was the moral verdict, one delivered by history, by American culture, by millions of fans who had once adored him. One newspaper wrote, "Bill Cosby was once the laughter of America. Today, he is the sigh of an entire culture." That day, America witnessed history, justice delayed, but not denied. Bill Cosby left the courtroom in gleaming handcuffs. That image closed the book on a golden era of American culture and opened a new chapter where truth could no longer be buried beneath fame. The final question still echoed. Was 3 to 10 years enough to erase decades of silence? Maybe not. But at the very least, it was proof that justice, though late, can still find its way. The public was stunned. Hollywood was shaken. And as the Me Too movement exploded, Cosby became one of the first powerful figures to fall. Universities stripped him of honorary degrees. Prestigious awards were revoked. And his once untouchable image, a cultural monument, collapsed into rubble. But the public wanted more than just symbolic punishments. They wanted real accountability. The Andrea Constand case was the key that unlocked everything. To support her testimony and prove the charges, the FBI had to step in. Their mission was not only to verify stories, but to dig into the very foundations of the Cosby empire. Agents hunted for physical evidence, documents, diaries, tapes, anything that could back up the accounts. They also traced the trail of hush money, secret payments meant to buy silence. Every check, every bank transfer could be a piece of the puzzle. This was no longer a single case. It had become a full-scale investigation into how one powerful man had used fame, money, and silence to maintain a system of wrongdoing for decades. And so, under the flashing lights of the press, the heavy footsteps of FBI agents echoed across the polished wood floors of Cosby's mansion. Golden decor wine cellars, safes. These weren't just assets. They were potential evidence. Stepping through those doors, America no longer saw a national father figure. They saw a fallen king. The question lingered. Inside this fortress of America's dad, what did the FBI uncover? The Cosby Kingdom, a fortress, hiding dark secrets. America's dad owned a castle of his own, a stone colonial mansion tucked away in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. But this wasn't just a home. It was a fortress. Heavy wooden fences, surveillance cameras, and a gate marked with private property. No trespassing. This was a place where secrecy and power converged dangerously. Cosby purchased the estate back in 1983 for about $225,000. Spanning 3 acres, the mansion resembled nothing less than a colonial-style palace. It featured 5 bedrooms, 4.5 bathrooms, 3 fireplaces, and central air conditioning, a shining symbol of wealth and authority. But the real shock was not in the numbers, it was in the design. This home was built like a stronghold, imposing iron gates, towering fences, and constant surveillance. Inside this golden fortress, every room reflected luxury and dominance. For a man who was once among Hollywood's most powerful, it was an empire of extravagance. An empire that drew the sharp eye of the FBI when they began digging into hidden finances and evidence. And this was only one piece of his kingdom. In Manhattan, Cosby and his wife Camille also owned a historic townhouse in the Upper East Side's Treadwell Farm District. The 4-story, 5,000-square-foot property came with its own elevator, a rarity for New York homes when it was built. Its upper floor featured a Juliet balcony, cedar closets, dressing rooms, and skylights. At one point, it was listed for $7 million, later reduced to $6.75 million, while Cosby faced a financial dispute over a $4.2 million loan. Once a beacon of prestige, it had become evidence of decline and financial strain. If the mansions were the outer shell of power, then art was the heart of the Cosby kingdom. Alongside Camille, he amassed more than 300 pieces of art valued at over $50 million. The collection included works by Picasso, Matisse, and most notably, The Thankful Poor, 1894, by Henry Ossawa Tanner, a masterpiece of African-American art. But it didn't stop there. Cosby indulged in luxury cars and elite possessions. He owned gleaming Rolls-Royces and Bentley, symbols of America's upper class. He even had his own private plane flying freely between mansion studios and comedy stages nationwide. One of his boldest purchases was the Shelby Cobra Super Snake CSX 3303, one of only 2 ever built by Carroll Shelby himself. The car was so powerful, he eventually returned it. But just having owned it spoke volumes about his limitless extravagance. The kingdom becomes a crime scene. The lavish mansions, the multi-million-dollar art, the luxury cars and private jets. These once crowned Cosby as one of the richest and most powerful men in America. But when the FBI stepped in, they were no longer symbols of triumph. They were evidence. And so, under a federal search warrant, the doors of Bill Cosby's mansion were thrown open. Every bedroom, every wine cellar, every vault was inspected. The media called it a national search where one of America's legends was stripped bare. FBI raid, discoveries that shook America. It was a cold night in late December 2015 in Cheltenham, Pennsylvania. The quiet street leading into Elkins Park suddenly lit up with flashing red and blue as a convoy of FBI vehicles pulled up in front of Bill Cosby's colonial stone mansion. Agents in bulletproof vests stepped out warrant in hand, pushing through the iron gates marked with a stark sign, "Private Property. No Trespassing." This mansion, once considered the private fortress of America's dad, had turned into a crime scene. The first stop, Cosby's private office. A secluded room with a walnut desk, towering bookshelves, once a place where only trusted guests were received. In the corner, agents found a locked file cabinet. Inside were stacks of bank statements, invoices, and contracts. But one set of documents stood out, proof that Cosby had repeatedly made large payments to settle cases out of court. The most striking involved Andrea Constant, the former Temple University basketball staffer, who in 2004 accused Cosby of drugging her. The case was initially dismissed, but later reopened after public outrage. Documents revealed Cosby had paid Constant $3.38 million in 2006 for her silence. This wasn't just a number, it was living evidence of the hush money machine he had operated for years. The FBI also uncovered unusual financial transfers, some linked to offshore trusts. While not all were tied directly to the scandal, they painted a picture of a complex financial web designed to obscure the truth. One FBI agent later remarked, "This wasn't just a one-time settlement. It was a mechanism, a machine built to shield Cosby from accusations." In the basement, agents shined their flashlights on a small wooden cabinet. Inside were dozens of bottles. Their labels faded. Quaaludes, diazepam, Valium. These weren't just medications, they matched testimony that had haunted the case for years. The smoking gun came from Cosby himself. In a 2005 deposition, sealed at first, then unsealed in 2015, Cosby admitted he had purchased Quaaludes to give to women. That revelation stunned America. Quaaludes, infamous in the 1970s and 1980s, matched exactly what many women had described relaxation pills, after which they lost control, waking up in unfamiliar rooms. When the deposition went public, the narrative shifted overnight. What had once been brushed off as rumor was now backed by Cosby's own words. The story was no longer, he said, she said. It was legal evidence undeniable. One prosecutor put it bluntly. This was the turning point. There was no more doubt. Cosby admitted he bought the drugs, and that admission was a verdict he wrote against himself. And Constant wasn't the only one. Other women had also signed settlements. Not all were revealed, but court records confirmed Cosby had a long history of paying out large sums to silence claims. Each settlement wasn't proof of innocence, it was proof of a system. Cosby had lawyers, accountants, and PR teams all working to preserve the image of America's dad. But when the Constant settlement surfaced, the mask crumbled. America understood this wasn't one sudden fall. It was a decades-long empire of silence and cover-ups. Piece by piece, the picture became clear Bill Cosby wasn't just a fallen entertainer. He resembled a kingpin, someone who knew how to use money, fame, art, and influence to build a hidden empire. The 10-year sentence seemed like closure, a dark chapter finally sealed with justice. But less than 3 years later, the prison doors swung open. Bill Cosby, the man once handcuffed before the eyes of millions, was set free. And in that moment, America exploded in outrage once more. Cosby's return, outrage across America. After serving just 3 years in state prison, Cosby walked free on June 30, 2021. Not because he had been exonerated, but because the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that a 2005 agreement not to prosecute him had been violated. The testimony he gave under that deal was later used against him in the criminal trial, a clear due process violation. It was a loophole in procedure, a technicality that left Americans furious rather than satisfied. Even at 83, Cosby wasted no time seizing the media spotlight. He tweeted, "I have never changed my story. I have always maintained my innocence. Thank you to all my supporters, especially the Pennsylvania Supreme Court for upholding the rule of law." To many, this wasn't a declaration of victory. It was a desperate attempt to rewrite the narrative. The country split in two. Some hailed the ruling as a triumph of fundamental civil liberties. Others were stunned, outraged that justice seemed undone by the very system meant to protect it. Andrea Constant, the central accuser in the case, voiced her frustration alongside her lawyer. "I am deeply disappointed. This decision may paralyze victims from coming forward. How much longer must we wait for justice to truly exist?" But not everyone was disappointed. Actress Felicia Rashad, who once played Cosby's wife on The Cosby Show, celebrated finally, a terrible wrong has been righted. Her statement sparked an uproar. Actresses like Amber Tamblyn and Rosanna Arquette, along with the Time's Up movement, condemned the ruling as a devastating setback for survivors. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Many thought that after escaping his criminal conviction, Bill Cosby might retreat into silence for the remainder of his life. But reality was far harsher. The past never sleeps. Civil lawsuits kept crashing against him like relentless waves. In 2022, a California jury ordered Cosby to pay $500,000 to Judy Huth, who testified that he assaulted her at the Playboy Mansion back in 1975. That verdict rang like a bell proof that no matter how many decades pass, the truth can resurface. Then came 2023. Joan Tarshis, a writer and one of the very first women to publicly share her story, filed a lawsuit under New York's Survivors Act. The law allows survivors to sue, even if the statute of limitations has long expired. For Tarshis, this wasn't just a case. It was a chance to reclaim the voice stolen from her in 1969. By 2024, another woman in Nevada came forward filing a lawsuit alleging Cosby assaulted her in 1986. Her claim deepened the wound, showing his behavior wasn't a one-time mistake, but a systematic pattern spanning decades. Each new lawsuit was another nail in the coffin of Cosby's reputation. For the American public, he was no longer just an aging entertainer limping through the twilight of his life. He had become the embodiment of truths buried too long. truths that had now risen with undeniable force, demanding a reckoning. And while battling in court, Cosby faced another front: his crumbling finances. In early 2025, a Manhattan court recorded 2 foreclosure actions against his Upper East Side townhouse after he failed to repay a $17.5 million loan. This was the same home he had once bought as a gift for his wife in the 1980s. Now it stood on the brink of auction. Unpaid taxes of more than $300,000 combined with an earlier foreclosure tied to a $4.2 million loan painted a stark picture. A man once untouchable in wealth and power, now watching his empire collapse piece by piece. Public reaction: from outrage to disillusionment. In 2025, when news broke of Cosby's foreclosed properties, the public was reminded once again that America's dad had not only lost his reputation, but now risked losing his very home. The anger wasn't just about past wrongs, but also about how he had escaped criminal punishment on a legal technicality, only to now face humiliation through financial ruin. Many asked, the truth is out, but what price has he really paid, and who can still trust the justice system after this? On forums linked to $Me Too and survivor advocacy groups, voices echoed a consistent theme. The highest price isn't measured in years behind bars, but in the respect for justice itself, something Cosby had long denied. Bill Cosby was once a man admired across America. For millions, especially within the Black community, he was a cultural icon, a source of pride who broke stereotypes. But behind the bright smile on screen, Cosby had hidden a devastating secret. He had spent decades buying silence to conceal repeated misconduct. And in the end, that very silence, the silence he purchased with millions, became the double-edged sword that destroyed the legacy he had built. The cost of betrayal, a shattered legacy. If Cosby lost something greater than money, it was the trust of an entire generation. Throughout the 1980s, The Cosby Show was hailed as a cultural milestone. For the first time, mainstream television embraced the image of a successful, educated, loving African-American family. Scholars even credited Cosby with paving the way for Barack Obama by reshaping how Americans saw Black families. But that image collapsed when the truth surfaced. Each survivor's testimony, each settlement document, each bottle of Quaaludes all cut through the idealized portrait Cosby had painted. The day Cosby was sentenced in 2018, it wasn't just a man entering prison. A cultural monument was torn from its pedestal. And when he was released in 2021, the fury had not faded. Americans knew that even if Cosby had escaped the law, he could never escape society's verdict. Before the scandal, he had been showered with honors medals, honorary degrees, lifetime achievement awards. Universities praised him. Institutions celebrated him as a role model. But since 2015, one by one, those honors were stripped away. Temple, Yale, Brown all rescinded their honorary degrees. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, along with countless organizations, erased his name from their rolls of distinction. No more America's Dad, no more medals, no more honors, only a name synonymous with betrayal. In American culture, few have ever fallen from grace as fast or as far. When Cosby entered state prison at age 81, cameras captured him in a gray jumpsuit, cane in hand, head bowed as he passed through the heavy steel doors. That image became global, once a legend now reduced to an aging inmate. He served nearly 3 years before being released due to a due process violation. But those years were enough to shatter the illusion. The beloved father figure of television was nothing more than a frail, disgraced prisoner. And even in freedom, Cosby was never truly free. The public turned its back. Television and Hollywood shut their doors. Old friends abandoned him. The isolation in society and culture, even within his own family, became the harshest sentence of all. The erased legacy Cosby once dreamed of leaving behind a cultural legacy. His show's scholarship funds and an African-American art collection worth tens of millions. But after the scandal, everything was tainted. His once praised art collection, including works by Picasso and Henry Ossawa Tanner, was now stained by association with dirty money. Scholarships bearing his name were frozen or rebranded. The Cosby Show, once a national treasure, was pulled from syndication, vanished from major networks. What remained of his legacy was not laughter, but betrayal. The silence that destroyed everything. In the end, Cosby's greatest cost wasn't money or even prison. It was silence. The silence of victims who feared speaking out. The silence of the public who worshipped fame. And Cosby's own silence choosing money over truth. That silence concealed crimes for decades. But when the truth finally broke through, that same silence destroyed everything. Because once the curtain fell, what remained wasn't just a personal scandal. It was a cultural tragedy. Bill Cosby has paid a price. But the price was never his alone. It is a lesson for all of society that no one, not even the most powerful, not even the most beloved, can ever outrun the truth. Bill Cosby in 2025, The Present Life of a Fallen Legend. Summer 2025. At 88 years old, Bill Cosby, the man once celebrated by millions of Americans as America's dad, no longer steps on stage, no longer fills television screens with laughter. Today he lives in seclusion, hidden in the shadows, weighed down by ongoing civil lawsuits, financial collapse, and the scornful gaze of the public. Once one of Hollywood's most powerful entertainers, Cosby now carries a bitter new title: the greatest cultural icon destroyed in the age of Me Too. Cosby lives almost entirely isolated. He makes no public appearances, speaking only rarely through a spokesperson. In July 2025, he broke his silence to mourn the death of Malcolm Jamal Warner, his on-screen son from The Cosby Show. Cosby compared the grief to losing his own son, Ennis. It was one of the rare times he revealed personal emotion, but the public showed little sympathy. In society's eyes, Cosby is no longer an entertainer. He is a disgraced man who once wore handcuffs in court. The longest sentence, not prison but unending outrage. Cosby may have escaped his 3 to 10 year prison term on a technicality, but the real sentence he continues to serve is the relentless outrage of the American public. People have not forgotten the chilling testimonies. They have not forgotten the image of him in handcuffs in 2018. They have not forgotten the dozens of women who courageously came forward to share their pain. In 2025, Bill Cosby lives like a ghost. No stage lights, no applause, no fortress-like mansion of power. Only old age crippling debt and a society whose anger has never faded. "I have always been innocent," Cosby once declared. But the American public has delivered a harsher verdict than any courtroom ever could, the verdict of rejection and contempt. This is the life of Bill Cosby at 88, a fallen legend, imprisoned not by steel bars, but by the rejection of the very culture that once worshipped him. What do you think about the price a legend must pay for his own betrayal? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss more hard-hitting stories about the world's most talked about celebrities.